Hello, and now I want to do something different. I want to talk about the murder of Shan'Ann Rzuchek Waats that happened on August 13th, 2018. And I want to shed a different light on that. So, for those who have not heard of it, let me sum up. Shan'Ann Rzuchek Waats was the mother of two adorable girls, Bella 4, Cece 3, and she was pregnant. She was 15 weeks pregnant with a baby boy. She lived in Frederick, Colorado. Originally, she and her husband were from North Carolina. She was married to Chris Waats, and she was working in Lavelle pyramid scheme, vitamin nutrition company, and was very successful at it. So her husband not only murdered her, but her girls, and placed them, what was quite barbaric detail, placed them in oil containers. It didn't take long to discover what he did. He tried to cover it up. Her best friend was on it from the beginning. She made everyone aware of her disappearance, and he agreed to a lie detector test and was found to be not telling the truth, and finally confessed. First he blamed her, and then he admitted he killed all four. The girls, her, and the baby. And so there are a lot of videos on YouTube about it. So let's continue to what I like to call lessons on domestic violence from the Shan'Ann Rzuchek Waats case. Because right now there's not a lot we can do except be horrified, or we can learn, and we can warn women from the same from reaching the same fate, or just to be in an abusive relationship. So reality and myths. So I've written down a few myths. Myth number 1: domestic violence happened to young, inexperienced women. So what can we learn from Shan'Ann? She was working. She was married at 18 for 6 years to a quite successful, educated man. He was a lawyer. She owned her own home. She was married before and divorced, so she had a lot of experience with relationship. Chris Waats, by the way, did not. She was his first serious relationship. Myth number 2: domestic violence can be easily recognized. Men hit or yell. Shan'Ann Waats' case, Chris Waats did not exhibit any signs of violence except for the fact he was passive, not communicating, not saying things. Like they say, it's always the quiet ones. Okay, there can be both modes. You can be openly angry and hostile, or you can be passive aggressive. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Myth number 3: violent men are bad fathers. So we learn from the Shan'Ann case, Chris Waats acted like a devoted father, bathed the girls, played with them. During their first visit to the beach, just shortly before they were murdered, he held their hands, staying watchful, being a responsible father. He looked as though he was watching them all the time. He acted like a caring man. And less than a month later, Chris Waats would suffocate them and place them in oil containers. Reality: there were at least 2 Chris Waatses. One was a caring, devoted, loyal father, Dr. Jekyll, and husband who followed orders, and the second, Mr. Hyde, an adventurous, sexually promiscuous, full of lust and passion with new love. He had a mistress from his workplace. Conclusion: Chris Waats was not especially gifted or intelligent as his mother thought. He was just a very simple-minded mechanic, sorry, but he doesn't have higher intelligence. Shan'Ann also was not educated. They were both probably of similar intelligence, although Shan'Ann seems to have more talents than him, and that she was she knew how to speak well, and she knew how to communicate with people, and she seemed to care about people. In fact, he was an average Joe. Chris Watts was an average Joe. If there was someone who thought Chris Watts was special, those were the two main women in his life, Shan'Ann and his mother Cindy. Both women couldn't see anything wrong with Chris Watts. They admired him. Actually, they were quite similar in a lot of things, which maybe explains the animosity. Sometimes people that are similar clash. They admired him, and Shan'Ann never had a bad word to say about him. His mother Cindy had blindly loved him, even after discovering he had smothered the life out of his pregnant wife and two beautiful toddler girls, age 4 and 3. And let me say, Shan'Ann and Cindy were definitely different in some ways, but they were similar in others. They were similar in the way they blindly loved Chris Watts and nurtured him to be this narcissist. But they were different in the sense that Shan'Ann was a very, very caring, loving, passionate woman, while Cindy seemed very cold and she seemed to lack a moral compass. In fact, she didn't care that Sissy was allergic to certain nuts, and she was sort of mocking that instead of respecting it. There is something seriously wrong with the woman, Cindy, and Shan'Ann is a much more loving woman. They're similar in their attitude towards Chris. And I guess it's not that you marry your mother, but you marry somebody who treats you in a similar way. If Shan'Ann were alive, I believe she would have forgiven him too. This blind admiration came from a man who seemed to live to please. He was always following orders. Beware of men who follow orders and never argue or rebel. So there were at least two Chris Watts, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. Mr. Hyde had been hidden for years. Dr. Jekyll pleased his parents, his wife, the community in which he lived. And I must add that I thought a lot about it, and I think it's wrong to blame victims of domestic violence, but we have to look at the contributing factors in order for people to learn from this case and be able to be aware of it. People that might be in a danger can learn from this case and be aware. So what I think Shan'Ann did, may she rest in peace, to contribute to it was a blind love. Love should never be blind. And when a man tells you we are incompatible, you should accept that. And she did not accept that. I understand her because I'm a passionate person myself. And if I was in love with someone and they told me we're incompatible, I would also find it hard to accept that. And I think it's very important, if a man tells you, I don't want to be with you, you should accept that. And she did not. She wrote a letter in which she said, I'm going to fight for us. No, you can't fight that. If a man doesn't want you, you have to accept it. Believe him the first time. So I think what happened was that he anyway had a lot of psychological problems between the Chris Watts that pleased people, Dr. Jekyll, and Mr. Hyde, the dark side. So when your shadow, this is what Carl Jung says, the famous psychologist, that if you're not aware of your shadow side, it will come back and destroy you, really. So people are unaware of their shadow side, can act in very dangerous ways. And I think Chris Watts was denying his shadow side. He was a people pleaser. He, on the one hand, on the other hand, he became very passionate when he started to lose weight, and for the first time in his life was actually looking attractive, although I don't think he was attractive, but he lost a lot of weight. He did a lot of fitness. He went to the gym a lot. He invested, and then all of a sudden he became aware of the fact that, he only had one relationship. Then maybe there are other women that might be more compatible to his personality, which was introverted. And Shan'Ann was very extreme other. She was very different than him. And he maybe was beginning to feel uncomfortable. She had to film everything. She talked a lot, and he was introverted. He did not seek to talk to people like her. He found that their differences became greater and greater, and having children was not enough to bridge that gap. And then he met somebody that was perhaps more compatible, because she was different than Shan'Ann. She looked a little bit similar. They were both beautiful women. But what he found attractive at first, that he thought Shan'Ann could bring him out of his shell, became with the years a burden, because he's so different, and it was so difficult for him to continue to live his life. He began to have two different personas, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And I think also he lacked a moral compass. I don't think he was raised in a family that taught him values of caring for other people. The fact that his parents banned his wedding seemed very extreme. I think it also has to do with cultural clashes, even though they were both similar working class people. They were not academics. They were not middle class and higher. They were both, seemed to me, working class. The Rzucheks were from a different culture. They're, I think, Italian. The mother is Italian. Shan'Ann's mother is Italian. The father, I'm not sure, East European, maybe Czech, maybe Polish. Very sorry to say it, but warm cultures. There are warmer cultures. Of course, I don't want to stereotype, but cultures do differ. And the Watts, I think, were Germanic, Prussian, very, very unemotional. I don't think they display affection. And I think the problem is that people like that, people that come from very cold cultures where they don't display emotions and don't talk a lot about how they feel and don't communicate their emotions, find people who do that, they find them, they look down at them. They look down at people like that because they value silence and stoic behavior. Whereas the Rzucheks were warm people who wore their hearts on their sleeves, and I think they also have a moral compass. They are people that have a strong faith, because otherwise I can't understand how they survived this horrific tragedy. And the Watts don't seem to have, even though Sydney quoted the Bible, I don't really think she understood the Bible, because otherwise she wouldn't have quoted the Bible, because the very pillars of the Bible are the 10 Commandments, and you don't excuse a murder, especially not children and women, a pregnant woman. So I think if she could quote the Bible and express her love for her son at a time where his crimes were exposed, and he was exposed as a murderer, the woman lacks a moral compass. It would have been different if she would said, okay, I believe in forgiveness, but what you did is the opposite of what faith and humanity is. People of faith do not murder, of course. They do not, and especially not children. And so I think the woman did not have a clear moral compass. I think he grew up in a very cold, uncommunicative home. On the one hand, I think he told his parents everything, because his father seemed to have known about the affair when he came in to the police investigation. And I think he was very open with his parents about his marital problems. He told his parents probably more than he told his wife. And I think this is where the problem laid, that he never really disconnected from his original family. And in the Bible, actually, it says that a man should leave his home and he should cling to his wife. And he did not. He was always more loyal to his parents. And when there was a discrepancy, when his mother did this, mocked the nut allergy of Cece, he took sides, obviously, and decided that his wife was not respecting his parents because his parents came first. And I think that was activated his shadow side because he was more loyal to his parents than to his wife. He probably didn't respect her because if you grow up thinking that it's better not to say things, silence is golden, and being stoic and not expressing your emotions is on a higher level than expressing your emotions, then a person that expresses their emotion is seen as beneath you. And I don't think he appreciated Shannon's warmth. He saw it as something not to be appreciated. He liked car mechanics. He was a very practical man. He didn't like showing emotions. I think probably his mistress, his relationship was more also practical, more sexual. I don't really think he was a person capable of expressing emotions. And I don't even know if he had any emotions to express. I think everything he did was copying a certain behavior of what he thought he should be. The way he Googled, when is it right to say I love you? It's kind of shows you that he really is not in touch. His emotional side is not activated. And Shan'Ann was very warm, affectionate, extrovert. And she came from a family where people were warm and they were people of faith and they had a moral compass of what is right and what is wrong. On the other hand, I want to say a few things. So where Shan'Ann went wrong is, first of all, she blindly loved her husband. And maybe she compared to her marriage to her parents' marriage, which is completely different. Because from what I saw for parents, they seemed both very nice people, very, very kind. And I think her marriage was very different. And I think she was not aware of the lack of communication. She was so busy communicating with the whole world. And I think part of the reason she did that was to compensate for the lack of communication in her marriage. Because if you have somebody next to you with whom you can talk, you don't need Facebook. Facebook is mostly for lonely people. And I think the people who post on Facebook a lot are lonely people. And if they're married, that means they don't have a partner with which to communicate. Mass media is for people that are alone or feeling alone. They could be in a marriage or relationship, but obviously they don't have a person to talk to and they need the whole world to compensate for that. So the way I saw her, she knew that people online on first name basis. She seemed to lack a real intimacy in her marriage, and that's also a red light. You think you have a close relationship, but if you do have an intimacy, you don't need to talk to everybody. You talk to your husband, or you talk to your wife if you are. Yeah, he also lacked intimacy. He turned to his parents, probably, and she turned to the whole world on Facebook. And I think she found a lot of solace, comfort in filming her family, and maybe she thought that her family was ideal and she was living an illusion. She was living in an illusion, a fairy tale. And so it was really hard for her to comprehend that the fairy tale was actually a nightmare. He even sent her a photo just before he killed her, just before he murdered her, of a doll covered and only her feet showing. So it's a corpse. And if she had any suspicion, it should have been a huge red flag. She didn't see the red flags, and I think her friends were similar minded. I wonder what she would have done if one of her friends said something is wrong, he's probably having an affair. Because what she described, him being cold I mean, there were so many red flags of him probably having an affair, and when he actually said that they're not compatible, he didn't have to actually come out and say, I'm having an affair. Once he said we're not compatible, that should have been enough. But because she was a person that was very passionate, it's very hard to her to conceive of the husband and the father of her children as being a very cold, calculating man who actually didn't have real feelings for her as she had. She had real feelings. She was connected to her heart and mind were one, and he's not like that. I don't know if he had I think he's a person who probably, I don't know if you could say doesn't have emotions, but probably cold calculating psychopath. And what happened to her at the end, I think she didn't struggle because I think he actually manipulated her into some sort of intimate